Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Morin. I am the head of marketing here at SmartAction, and I am your host today. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. Today, we are talking about the 4 ways that AI-powered virtual agents are automating the contact center. One of the biggest emerging categories in the contact center space right now is this emergence of self-service from virtual agents with natural language processing. As you know, IVRs are limited on their automation capabilities. It's costly, very costly, and time-consuming to try to do anything with them to add more self-service capabilities. And that's just the way it's always been in a pre-AI era, in a pre-cloud era, which is also why most contact centers have an over-reliance on live agents, even for the most routine and repetitive call types and processes, the types that require very little complex thinking. But now that we are seeing AI-enabled technology, and now that we are seeing the delivery of it over the cloud, this means that the landscape for contact centers has changed. It's changed in a big way in a very short time. So what that means is, for the first time ever, organizations can actually get past the limitations of their IVR. They can automate more conversations than ever before by using AI-powered virtual agents over the cloud that deliver as good or better customer experience as live agents, as long as you're using them in the right way. And of course, the big kicker, doing it at 1/10 the cost. So today's webinar is going to highlight the practical realities around virtual agents, what's happening right now, how leading companies have implemented virtual agents and what they're using them for. So we're going to share examples from AAA, Office Depot, MGM Resorts, and many more. Now, with me today is our subject matter expert, Tom Lewis. For 13 years, he was the partner at Deloitte Consulting, where he led their customer service advisory practice, advising Tom, I think, on everything under the sun in the contact center space. Fortune 500 clients on contact center strategy, technology, operations, customer experience, you name it. He's currently the CEO at SmartAction. Tom, good to have you with us today.
Thanks, Brian.
Now, we are slated for 30 minutes, but I do want everyone to know that as much as we have set content, we like this conversation to be audience-driven as much as possible. And in order to do that, all you have to do is just click on that Q&A icon that you see and just chime in with your question. We'll address some of those as we go along. And those that we don't get to during the presentation, as soon as we finish at the bottom of the hour, we will move to a full Q&A to make sure that we tackle all of those. So in front of you is a company overview slide, just so you know who's doing the talking and why we might have any credibility on the subject. Now, I'll speak personally. I'm not a fan of long company overview slides, so I will try to make this quick. As you can see, SmartAction started as an AI research company back in 2002, so we're not by any means the new kids on the block when it comes to AI development, machine learning, natural language processing. We've been doing it over 15 years, supporting AI-powered self-service across every industry. We support hundreds of call types and chats across all those industries. Now, where we fit is with companies who already have a contact center platform or an IVR. It might be a Genesys, an Avaya, a Nice and Contact, or so on. And they lean on us to expand self-service automation in their environments, simply because those platforms, they either don't have the capabilities of an AI virtual agent, or it's just too hard and too costly to do it through their telephony platform. And generally, it just doesn't work very well. It's just not what they're good at. It's not what they're focused on. So due to our leadership here, Gartner named us the Cool Vendor of the Year this year. Or in fact, just last month, Frost & Sullivan named us the leader in AI-enhanced self-service solutions. And as far as any street cred, if you're wondering about our street cred, you can CR reviews, peer reviews on Gartner Peer Insight. They have us listed among a handful of leaders in the space, and it just so happens we are the top ranked and most reviewed solution among the likes of IBM Watson and others. So enough about us. Let's go ahead and just jump into the subject at hand. And really it's, why are we having this discussion in the first place? And more than ever before, the top-down strategic initiative in corporate America is around this idea of where and how can AI help our business in a practical way. Tom, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, hey, Brian, as you mentioned, we started as an AI research company back in 2002. So that means we've had a front row seat watching this trend develop and expand in the market. And as few as 5 years ago, it was interesting, we debated whether we even wanted people to know we were an AI company because it tended to confuse prospects when we talked about it versus self-service. And to give you an idea how fast this is changing, even just if I look over the recent past, last few weeks, we participated at Microsoft with their AI, or with an AI briefing in Redmond. We delivered a keynote to the University of Wisconsin on self-service. And then we were also invited to Vanguard, the wealth management company, to brief their entire management team on the state of automation. This is just a few examples, and those invitations and initiatives weren't happening at the pace. They were happening, but just not at the pace as they were just 2 years ago. So commonplace now, what lets you know that the market is still trying to get up to speed on this topic and still very relevant.
Now, in front of you is a very simple diagram. What we're referring to this is as yesterday's contact center. You can just simply think of it as a pre-AI, pre-cloud contact center. But as I shift and I move from yesterday's contact center to today's contact center, you can see that the biggest change is this introduction of AI-powered virtual agents that work alongside your live agents via the cloud. So instead of just having a simple touch-tone automation or even directed dialogue from your IVR and then everything else going to a pool of live agents, there's now a pool of virtual agents to automate many of the call types and chats that used to be handled by live agents. Now, there's certainly other implications for AI in the contact center, but the seismic shift at the moment seems to be in this area of self-service.
Yeah, that's right, Brian. In fact, one of the biggest points to be made here is that that emerging virtual agent solutions are delivered over the cloud. So you might wonder, what's the big deal about that? Everything seems to be cloud this day. Well, the big deal is seamless integration to any, and I mean any, architecture, and no hardware required to make any of this work from our customer's perspective. So nothing changes except that, and instead of routing some calls to live agents, you're now routing calls to virtual agents where they either complete the call or transfer to a live agent with a screen pop of gathered data so the human agent can pick up the call from there.
So Tom, maybe just describe just a minute, how new is this?
Well, voice automation has been around for a while, but up to this point, I would say it's not been very good. Not to mention it hasn't been easy to implement. And then on top of that, it's also been very expensive. So, however, as an industry, we've been moving really fast in the area of AI, speech recognition, and natural language processing. So if you think about it, just a few years ago, we were frustrated with Siri. It was amazing, but frustrated, as a voice interface. And now, so it's more or less gone by the wayside. Everyone is accustomed to the voice-to-machine interface on their phone and in their home. And now they expect it from their contact center, and they expect it to be just as good. Now that speech recognition has largely been tackled, it has opened up a new world of cognitive capabilities to do something intelligent, or should I say human-like, with what was heard. And now companies are actually using it pretty intriguing ways.
Yeah, and in a minute, we're going to share how companies are using it. But Tom, I should just jump in with this question, as I guarantee it will come up, and we hear it all the time. Does this mean that live agents will go away and be replaced by virtual agents? And if so, when?
No, not at all. In fact, there will always be a place for live agents in the contact center, at least for the next several decades. Today, there just are a series of human emotions that are just not suited yet for automation. Conversations that require things like empathy, critical thinking, or persuasion are some examples of that. The emergence of virtual agents are, however, upskilling humans to complex critical thinking roles so that they're being more effective. So if the call type or chats that are routine in nature, or at least well-defined, are the first ones to be automated. And it just so happens that the majority of call types in most call centers, not all, but are routine in nature. And so to that extent, the future is now. We have many customers who offload more than half of their call and chat volume with virtual agents.
Well then, Tom, with that said, where do most customers start?
I think most almost always start small, demonstrate the success, and then expand to other call types. I think it's just a prudent way to go about it. A good example is at the world's largest pizza chain. We're working with them right now to automate their rapid reorder. In other words, allowing returning customers, repeat order customers, to order the same thing they did last time. Turns out that a significant number of customers simply reorder the same pizza every time. Makes sense? I typically do that. All other custom food orders, on the other hand, go to live agents. But now that we have rapid reorder underway, we're moving to the next phase to handle their daily specials. After the specials, the roadmap continues, and it's to handle some food orders and so forth and so on. So as you can see, although virtual agents are only handling a portion of the call volume now, in the not too distant future, you may not order pizza or food, for that matter, from a human ever again.
Well then, Tom, it sounds like that instead of a great big bang implementation from the get-go, that it really is just about identifying the place to start.
Yeah, exactly. The key collaboration we do with clients is identifying just that, where to start, the 2 to 3 call types or chats that are most obvious candidates for AI automation that delivers an immediate ROI, and creating what we call a self-funding business case. So getting the realization very quickly. This is part of the benefits of the cloud. And by most obvious candidates, I mean call types where the live agent almost feels like a robot doing the job anyway. It's generally not requiring complex thinking or troubleshooting. They could even be turning the page in a magazine next to them while doing it. And maybe that's a little extreme, but actually I'm sure some of the call center veterans on the phone have seen agents recite scripts and enter keystrokes without even looking at the screen because they've done it so many times. And so those are probably, something that looks like that would probably be a good candidate. In some cases, it's just one call type. But for most of our customers, frankly, it's a few, if not several. And typically, those are also the highest volume. So this is another reason why you want to consider a cloud-based service. So you can start small without a large upfront investment. And that way you can try it without any risk and sort of kick the tires.
Now, Tom, I know you're mentioning here kind of the most obvious starting points, but I feel the point probably should really be made that as much as simple call types and chats are obvious starting points, the fact is that you work with a lot of customers solving very complex multi-turn conversations with AI-powered virtual agents. So it's not just the simplest call types and chats.
Yeah, that's right. And so when asking where we start, typically it's the simple ones, but the advantage of the AI is really getting into those complex call types. So that's where the real power of AI is being realized. Perhaps a good example is AAA, where virtual agents handle the entirety of emergency roadside assistance for some of the clubs out there. So as you can imagine, that's a complex process. This means a natural language greeting to capture one of several reasons why they might be calling, finding out where they're located through GPS, and finding and dispatching the nearest tow, then checking in with the truck operator, make sure that they showed up, and adjusting the ETA or the estimated time of arrival, and then checking back with the caller to confirm that the ETA still works. So it's not just one call, but a very complicated process overall that's managed through AI. Another example with one of the top 2 insurers in the world, they use virtual agents with service providers, people who are repairing vehicles, and service providers have to call in to find out what's covered on a policy and get it authorized to do the work. And this is a conversation where the happy path, as it turns out, turns 17 different sort of utterances back and forth within that conversation. Each turn also has a fork in the road potential to a different outcome depending upon the answers that's given and how that matches against data in the customer record. So one of the most difficult pieces in that particular example is capturing long alphanumeric sequences as part of the policy number. And voice recognition generally hasn't been super great at that. And so it's hard even for a human to do, and definitely something that if you've got alphanumerics, you can't do with touch tone easily. So, but AI virtual agents can do the whole call in 3 minutes and save time. In fact, costing about a tenth of the cost of a live agent.
So Tom, maybe we should just level set with a quick definition of a virtual agent first. Some of those out in the audience listening in might be just kind of wondering top level, what can a virtual agent do?
Yeah, well, to be clear, I'm not really talking about simple chatbots here. I'd say strike that from your idea. We're talking about a cloud-based AI brain that is connected to some data in that your live agents are seeing as well, and has the ability to read and record data just like your live agents. Has the ability to recognize natural language, extract intent over the phone, chat, or text, navigate these multi-turn conversations like the one I talked about a moment ago, and predict why someone may be calling. So there's a lot there. And the term virtual agent is used because it essentially has all the tools to mimic live agents' behavior within the confines of the defined business rules, where that the virtual agent will provide a customer experience as good as a live agent. Now, remember, customers choose the channel they choose based on which one they think will take the least amount of effort. So this is why you want a virtual agent that you only need to train once and then deploy on channels so that you make it easy for customers to use it, and whether that's in voice, chat, or text.
So I want to remind the audience that if you want to help steer the conversation, just feel free to type in your question in the Q&A box as we go along, and we'll try to tackle that. Now, Tom, let's talk about that. For any organization that has yet to transform, even one call type or chat, to AI automation, a lot of this just looks and feels like a great big black box. So on screen is the first of 4 ways that organizations are using AI-powered virtual agents right now. So can you go ahead and just share the concept of a natural language intent capture and some examples on who's using this?
Sure. So lots of contact centers are using it. One of the benefits to the AI-powered virtual agent solution is that you have natural language processing technologies at your disposal. And so that means understanding intent from an open-ended question instead of making the caller sit there and listen to a long list of single-word commands or buttons to press and so forth. So natural language makes the self-service experience a lot faster because the customer doesn't have to deal with the pain of a lengthy phone tree, which is one of the things that drives most people crazy when they try to self-service with a machine. With AI, it doesn't have to be that hard. And I suppose a good example of this is the largest hospitality chain in Las Vegas that we work with. When it comes to the largest hotel casinos in the world, there are a lot of places where callers can be routed, whether it's the front desk, the casino, or making a reservation, what have you. And so they tried to tackle it with their IVR, but the menu was very, very long. And so they reverted back to live agents for routing. Or that ultimately meant callers waiting on hold for live agents, and it was costing a lot. So they replaced the live agents with an AI-powered virtual agent that simply asks, how can I help you today? And so depending upon the property that we're talking about, the solution needed to be capable of understanding the intent for upwards of 10 to 15 different endpoints within that property before routing, or taking the caller down to the next level of questions. And so what I mean by that is if a caller says reservations, the virtual agent can deduce part of that and make a reservation, but it's not quite the whole story. So it needs to dig deeper and says, I heard reservations, might say, I can help you with hotel, restaurant, or show reservations. Which do you prefer? So there's a lot to pick from there.
Sure. So, Tom, I know in this example, we're talking about a lot of intents to handle, considering all the ways that someone could, ask for something at a casino. Now, Niraj, he chimed in with a, timely question here. He said he joined in a little late, and this is just a prime example. He said, what type of data, and let's just use this instance with, this hotel casino, what type of data was required to train the virtual agent?
Sure. So I guess in answer to that question, for this particular one, we had 500 live agent call recordings for each endpoint within the casino. That was enough data to identify, the vernacular that customers used and to build out the language acoustic models. Now, keep in mind, we do all of that, and we do it for each intent. So we might be listening for hundreds of different things, and so that's how we set it up. But more than that, we improve over time as we ingest more of our own data and scale our cognitive capabilities with it. But for the rollout, 500 calls was enough for each endpoint, and that's how we got the AI to work its magic and added that to the thousands of grammars that we have in our centralized natural language engine. So frankly, another example is what we do with AAA clubs around the country regarding the roadside assistance. I alluded to this earlier. When a caller goes into AAA, they're greeted by the club's own IVR with a traditional touch tone option. And that's the way they like it, and that's fine. If they choose roadside assistance, then they're routed to us. And so when they're routed to us, they might need help with 7 different things. Things like, I don't know, need a jump, or repair a flat tire, getting a tow, or getting some fuel. You get the idea. So instead of giving them a long menu of the possibilities to choose from, we simply ask, how can I help you today? And while we're waiting on the answer, we'll go get their caller ID and pull in their membership information to ensure their account is active, ensure they have available credits or tows, and so that we know we're in the clear to proceed with the call.
So, Tom, what happens in the case that you can't match their caller ID to the account?
Well, we do the same thing as the live agent and authenticate them with their home address to match the account. In fact, an interesting point here is that during the discussion with clients and prospects of ours, we often get questions similar to that. And we refer the answer to that question as the golden rule, which is, how does an agent handle it? And because that's how the virtual agent should handle it, except with the ability to process data even quicker. So the reason we use their home address is because that's the same thing the live agent would do if the telephone number didn't match.
So, Tom, then, what happens if the virtual agent doesn't understand intent after asking that first open-ended question?
Well, after that first question, if a virtual agent doesn't capture intent immediately, we suggest a handful of the most common, phrases or intent, and try to direct them a little bit more. I'm sorry, I didn't get that, maybe, or whatever sort of transitional phrase, and then we give them coaching. You can say things like flat tire, need a jump, or need a tow. And so, even though we're listening for more intents than just those, we're trying to make a suggestion to the caller on how they can interact with the system.
Now, Tom, I know that we'll have some listening in the audience, and they'll say, "Well, hold on, Tom. What if by chance the follow-up question has been asked and intent still isn't captured? What happens then?"
Sure. So if for whatever reason we don't capture the intent after that clarifying question, then we typically transfer the call to the live agent. But we're also typically talking about a very small percentage of the calls. In some cases, it might be excessive background noise that can't be canceled out, or freeway noise, or what have you. And so it makes good sense to just transfer it to a live agent. But keep in mind too, some of our clients are a little more prescriptive, and they really don't want that second qualifying question. If they don't get it right off the bat, they want those calls transferred to a live agent right away if we don't understand it. And over time, that tends to improve, and we get less and less of that, but you get the idea. And so if we don't understand the intent after the first open-ended question, it's really up to the client on how they want to design it.
Now, Tom, Darish came back with a follow-up question and just want to know, as far as what was needed training the virtual agent. He just want to know if you're able to use existing recordings that they already have related to intents.
Sure, you're able to use existing recordings to coach the system. But the thing is that the way we trained our system was trying to account for accents and the variability of all the things that people could say. And so when I was referring to earlier of those thousands of grammars and so forth, we solved that for that by training our proprietary voice recognition system with speeches from the UN and TED Talks, and where the script was transcribed and certified, essentially. So using the variability of that, and so that broad canvas of voices made our speech recognition engine even more flexible and less susceptible to accents. And if our customers have voice recordings and things like that that can be used in any of the things we just talked about, then that adds more fuel to the fire.
And I guess that would be needed in cases where your centralized engine doesn't already have maybe all the acoustic models and grammars around those intents.
Sure. For like a cruise line, we didn't have necessarily the boat names, for example, so we added that in.
So, Tom, a question here came in from Mary, and this was during your large hotel casino answer. In some of these cases, it almost sounds like the virtual agent is replacing the IVR. if it's capturing intent and then routing. So should agents or should listeners think of virtual agents in this context?
Well, virtual agents augment the automation capabilities of your existing IVR by adding conversational AI, but it's not meant as a replacement, and it doesn't plug into your existing IVR. It's an alternative. Use your IVR for where you think it's needed, and then use an AI virtual assistant where you'd otherwise have agents doing it. So you can have the best of both worlds. We've got plenty of customers who will put our virtual agent in front of their IVR, capture intent using natural language, and then push to their IVR. We got other customers do the opposite. They use their IVR, as I was talking about, for the AAA, for the selection up front, and then route to our system if it's a call type intended for a virtual agent that, otherwise a human would be taking. So a good example would probably be Textile Fashion Group. If you haven't heard of them, they got subsidiaries, brands like Just Fab, Fabletics, and Shoe Dazzle. And so when a customer calls into the virtual agent, it greets them with "How can I help you today?" instead of "Press 1, press 2, or what have you. And if they're calling to make a payment, we send them to the payment IVR. But if they're calling about order status, billing, managing their account, skipping a month, those kind of things, they stay in the automation on our network. And if it's anything outside of those parameters, then they're transferred to the appropriate live agent by skill. So keep in mind, since this is an AI-powered virtual agent, the channel doesn't really matter. And this is interesting in the Textile example, because voice, chat, text, it just didn't matter. And Textile and others are able to offer their customers identical self-service capabilities over voice and within their chat environment. So, and then if I may, another good example is one of the biggest shoe retailers. When a caller calls in, we use their caller ID, we call to their back-end web service to pull up the customer account. And so we can verify their name and zip code to authenticate who they are. But then we try to determine intent by asking, "How can I help you again?" And then we give them some coaching, like you say things like password reset or rewards or what have you. So again, even though we suggest 3 intents, we're actually listening for a number of different things in the background and keep that automation within the virtual agent. And anything outside of that is transferred to a live agent along with screen pops of the gathered data. And so that allows the agent to really pick up the call from where it left off, as opposed to having to start the call over again.
Well, thanks, Tom. And you did just encroach, on the second way that organizations are using virtual agents, and that's in this area of front-end data gathering. It's the routine part of many calls that can chew up precious and expensive live agent handle time just because it is so repetitive. You mentioned how we authenticate and then pass along with a screen pop, if it turns out that the call type should be handled by a live agent instead of a virtual agent. Maybe you can share some of the top use cases here and what customers are saying.
Okay, so let me give a couple examples. First of all, in the medical space, authentication can take up a large amount of handle time due to HIPAA compliance. So HIPAA, for those who don't know, requires companies to triangulate around 3 data points among 6 or 8 available in order to make sure you're really talking to the patient. And so a good example of this would be JB Medical Supply. They're a large medical supplier, got thousands of patients calling in, and the worst situation is the patients who don't have all of those pieces of information available. And sometimes that's because a caregiver is calling in for the patient instead, but that means they have to go retrieve it while the agent waits, which chews up even more expensive agent time and so forth. And so by routing the front end of the calls for this HIPAA authentication piece to virtual agents, automation has saved them over 3 minutes, and in many cases more than that, on every call. And so we have a complete deep dive case study, by the way, on this on our website, or you can get that through their website, examples including information on the savings that they realized. So another one is the second largest home appliance manufacturer in the world. They automated all of their customer authentication, not HIPAA, but authentication and product registration process 6 months ago. And this means customer name, product names, model number, serial number, date of purchase, all that kind of stuff. They monitored average handle time for the virtual agents that were handling that and the live agents very closely. And what they found was that the average handle time for the virtual agent was just under 2 minutes. When they examined the corresponding drop in the live agent handle time to try to figure out the ROI, they actually also saw a reduction of the live agents by 2 minutes. So in other words, the virtual agent and the live agent were doing the same routine task in about the same amount of time, but about a tenth of the cost. So one example, we did it faster, and another example is about the same. Either way, significantly cheaper. And so the main point to be made here is that if you're already automating the simple and most repetitive tasks through your existing IVR, make a payment, for example, and it's working for you, keep it. But the point of the AI-powered virtual agent evolution is that it allows you to go a lot deeper into complexity and automate many of the conversations handled by your live agents at a very low cost. And, I've said a tenth of the cost. If there's defined business rules, keep in mind, to the conversation, and that can keep a virtual agent in its lane and do what it's good at, and then get it off to a agent if not. But otherwise, that's a great candidate for AI automation.
So Tom, you just brought up something that's really important for our audience to understand. One of the most important pieces to understand is this idea around defined business rules, as that's ultimately the litmus test to define what can be successfully handled by a live agent, what should be handled by a human. Now, the third way in front of our listeners right now that virtual agents are being used is likely the most obvious. It's certainly the most interesting, which is fully automating certain call types. The high volume, repetitive, routine calls that come in the contact center over phone or chat. Perhaps you can share some really common use cases here.
Sure. A great place to start is with the largest pizza chain in the world. It was mentioned earlier. So when we greet a caller, we trigger the system to call into their backend database using their caller ID to pick up, say, 10 to 15 data points. If they're calling about a pizza order already in process, then we look at the data to see if they ordered within the last 2 months. If it's in process, it's probably better to send that to the store. And because the back-end data doesn't necessarily track it, and so we'll ship that off to the store. But if they're ordered within the last 2 months, let's say, then we can provide a predictive experience and basically change the greeting, knowing there's a high probability that they want to order the same thing they ordered last time. Before the virtual agent can even offer the reorder, there are some business rules. And so this is what you asked about that have to be met. And in that case, there's probably 5 or 6. Previous order had to occur within the last 60 days. So that's that 2-month period. The client wanted us to make sure that the order was in 15% of today's price of the same thing. Store still has to be open and exist. The menu items have to all be there. And interestingly enough, delivery within the next 90 minutes. So if it doesn't fit those parameters, then the call is transferred to a live agent. But if it meets those parameters, then it's fully contained within the virtual agent. And so identifying what stays inside the virtual agent and what needs to be handled by a live agent is dictated by those business rules of our clients. And they're determined during the deployment process. And it's the only thing that's sort of unique about the implementations, because a lot of the other stuff is back in that core brain cloud environment, but these things are tailored. So let me give you a couple more examples of this. So back to healthcare again. Healthcare gets a lot of inbound calls from patients to find out if a procedure needs to be, let's say, pre-authorized or not. And in that case, there might be 15 or 20 that don't require pre-authorization. And so when a virtual agent hears one of those, then it keeps it in automation. But if it's outside of that, then the procedure that needs pre-auth, gets transferred to a live agent if it's outside of one of those, 15 to 20. So it's upskilling the humans to handle the more complex ones. And to do that, the whole trick is using business rules from the data retrieved to identify what should stay within automation and what should be transferred to a live agent. So it's the only way you can automate something without sacrificing this ounce of customer experience, because you're identifying the lanes where the virtual agent will perform well or better than a live agent 100% of the time, while transferring any scenarios that go outside of that lane to a live agent. If I can, I go back to the AAA emergency roadside assistance one. And so, we authenticated who they were. We evaluated their membership as active, if they have remaining tows, if they are in the correct geographic location. The answer is no to any of those, then those go to an agent. And so, moreover, when we're listening to the various intents on what they need, if we hear they're locked out of the car, and that's, doesn't sound good, we want to transfer them to a live agent immediately, because it requires some complex critical thinking. And so, if it's an emergency, that type of thing, we want to get it to a live person. But if anything else, out of fuel, flat tire, needing a tow, virtual agent can complete all of those. So it's always about using the business rules to identify what stays with a virtual agent, where you can guarantee a great experience, and what threshold should trigger transfer to live agent. And so a couple more for you. Office Depot has a straightforward return process, and so they're not using virtual agent for everything, but they've identified returns as the best place to start with virtual agents, and that ROI is a no-brainer, and the customer experience in that case is very good. So, and then we also have a major electronics manufacturer that you'd all know the name of, and our virtual agents are helping them with product registration and tier 1 tech support. So one of the problems they had is that nearly every technical support call had to start with a 3-minute power cycle to just get the conversation going and make sure the basics, was it plugged in or what have you. So by having the virtual agent automate that process, they're able to automate all tier 1 tech support options. And if the problem isn't resolved and needs to be escalated to a technician, the virtual agent is now saved them somewhere between 3 and 5 minutes on every one of those calls. So it bears repeating one last time that the primary exercise is simply understanding what virtual agents can do so that you can use the defined business rules from your customer data to keep virtual agents in their lane where customer experience is better or perfect, and then transfer the exceptions to the live agents where critical thinking is required. So finally, many call types have exceptions that require complex critical thinking, and sometimes the exceptions outnumber the rule, and that's fine, but the rule is still thousands of calls. As long as you have the data and the business rules to create a lane for virtual agents where the CX isn't compromised, you're now upskilling the agents to do what only humans should be doing anyway.
So Tom, finally, the fourth way and last way that organizations are using virtual agents is in this area of outbound calls and text. Typically organizations have 2 outbound options. You can either use a human, which is expensive, or a robocall, which is cheap, but it really can't do anything outside of just giving an alert or reminder. So maybe just a couple really quick examples of how companies are using virtual agents here.
Yeah, so about 1/3 of our overall business is outbound, actually. And so I see this as an untapped opportunity because having humans do it can get expensive. And one example is Penske Truck Rental, and in that case, you could use a robocall to update them. But the complexity is really that if somebody needs something, then there needs to change the reservation, what have you, then they got to call in, and that's not a great customer experience. So we can reschedule that. And if another example would be for one of the larger automotive manufacturers, they need to schedule appointments when a vehicle recall, somebody calls in about a vehicle recall and they want to schedule an appointment. That scheduling stuff, humans can handle that fine. Do you have something available next Tuesday morning? Simple for you and I to understand that, but getting automation to understand. This is actually one of the things that we started with way back when in the early 2000s, and have since perfected, is scheduling all of that time-space continuum. So this is the complexity I mean by handling well-defined rules based on dialogue and virtual agents. And those, I think virtual agents are excellent at that.
So Tom, I'm just going to just bring this home, and we're going to ask this question. Why SmartAction? And I know we've run long on content here. We're about to move to Q&A, but can you share with the audience, if you can, maybe in 3 minutes or less, just simply why organizations choose SmartAction for AI-enhanced self-service?
Yeah, so I think that clients choose us when, it's usually because we're trying to make life less hard to deploy in conversational AI automation. I would say it's easy. I'd say instead of less hard, but let's be honest, creating a great customer service experience with a machine is never easy. That's why we say we make it less hard. And it's because of a couple of different reasons. One, the technology is delivered over the cloud, so the integration is easy. And enhancements are made centralized. At this point, we've built so many apps that support self-service across so many different use case industries. I'd be surprised if we don't have sort of that back-end building block. So it's typically a light customization on the customer's side and building on all of those building blocks. So beyond that, beyond features and functions, I think a big reason companies choose us is because we deliver this technology as a service. So nothing makes life less hard for you than that. The idea is it's not a DIY platform. It's not, we don't sell, we don't license the software, we provide all the services along with the technology to transform this virtual agent environment. So even though we started as an AI research company, the fact is we're really focused on CX, and that's why we have a staff of CX experts around it using our proprietary technology. And so the whole thing is included together in a flat per minute rate. So the pricing couldn't be simpler or more affordable than that. And everything we do is with the obsession of making life less hard.
So regarding next steps, I know that most start right here by engaging us for a free AI readiness assessment. It's simply discovering the call types or chats in your contact center that are perfect candidates for AI automation, and then outline what that means for your business from a business case standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very consultative approach. I mentioned I came from Deloitte, so it's sort of architected around consulting and solving the business problem. When we examine the call types and the data, what we're looking for is the perfect marriage where the virtual agent are doing exactly what they're best at, so your live agents are only doing what humans should be doing. And that's the perfect marriage. It only happens when we know enough about your call types and the data to guarantee the transformation to automation will happen without sacrificing an ounce of customer experience and delivering that business case, that self-funding business case we talked about earlier.
So I have been, just so you know, I've been asked, are we going to be sharing the recording? And the answer is yes, we will share the recording. The recording of this won't be rendered until much later. So what we'll do is within 30 minutes of the webinar being over, you will receive an email from one of our reps here that at least has the PDF to the deck. And then tomorrow morning, that same rep will follow up to provide the full on-demand webinar so you can share it with stakeholders. With that said, we are going to move to a full Q&A session for those of you that do have questions. For those of you that hung on a little long, we appreciate it and look forward to continuing the conversation. But those of you that have questions, please just type those questions into the Q&A box for Tom. We'll both sit here and have a sip of our coffee while we wait for some of those questions to come in. And Tom, I do have one question for you here from, I guess this is from an anonymous attendee. And I don't know how quantifiable this can be as an answer, but Tom, any idea the percentage of call centers using AI today? Maybe I guess you can put on your Deloitte consulting hat here, and just trying to assess the market for solutions like this.
Yeah, I think from an AI injection into customer service, this is still, we're still in the dawn of that. I think that the full use of AI in call centers is not very prolific. But, if you're talking about chat, I think there's an interesting, and chat bots, there's an interesting amount of experience going on right now around what works and what doesn't. If you're talking about voice, that's a lot more mature. And certainly in our case, we have both solutions, and we've got a good experience base on that, but there's a very wide aperture available for customer service call centers to explore this. And what I said earlier was start small and sort of expand, mitigate your risk. And so this is a situation where you can get educated on it, you can explore it, you can get some self-funding ROI to perpetuate it. And but it's not prolific yet by a long shot.
So Tom, I have a question here. Just it's wondering kind of about the voice, and the chat. Just wanting an idea of where do most customers start? Do they start with voice, or do they start with chat? Do they do both voice and chat, or do they do one or the other with you? Do they sometimes just do voice or just do chat?
Well, so the good news is in our world, it doesn't matter. You can start with voice, or you can start with chat. Generally speaking, however, when we put the ROI together jointly with our clients, we typically see that the bigger bang for the buck in the short term is still voice. Voice is still the most prolific, most voluminous channel. However, having automated those things through voice, being able to essentially just flip on these other channels makes it pretty easy to, I'd say, typically start with voice and then move into either chat SMS, or we even do Facebook Messenger and so forth, and evaluating the business case on those. Now, keep in mind, voice might be suitable for, let's say, making a payment, but you wouldn't use SMS for that because it's not secure enough. And so there's some of that goes into this as well.
Good. Well, Tom, I don't see any other questions that are coming in at this time. I don't know if you have any closing remarks on your side.
No, I think we covered a lot of ground here today. This was some good and interesting questions. As you said, would love to have a conversation with anybody to peel this onion back a lot further. So thanks for facilitating today, Brian.
Sure. So everyone listening in, you will be receiving an email follow-up. Just if you're wondering who to reach out to, you will get an email shortly. As we mentioned, it really is about identifying the place to start. So we certainly take a very consultative process to help you with that identification. If you're looking at your contact center and you see those perfect places to start, the repetitive and routine call types, chats, and processes, and then help you build that business case. So you will receive a PDF of the deck right after the call, and then we'll follow up with the on-demand webinar, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with you. Thank you.